My name is Amelia Hayes. I am 36 years old, and I live in Palo Alto, California. The night my husband threw a full glass of red wine into my face, 300 executives, investors, engineers, and reporters watched him laugh as if humiliating me were part of the product demonstration. It happened beside the main stage at the launch of LumenCore, the technology Richard had spent 2 years calling his masterpiece. A 40-foot screen behind him displayed a glowing image of the device, a wafer-thin optical processor designed to perform artificial intelligence calculations while using a fraction of the electricity consumed by conventional chips. Analysts were already valuing the company at more than $4 billion. Contracts with hospitals, defense contractors, and cloud computing firms waited in digital folders upstairs. Every champagne glass in the hall seemed to reflect Richard's face. Natalie Cross stood at his side wearing a silver gown, one hand resting possessively on his sleeve. She was the company's chief brand officer, the woman who had turned Richard into a magazine cover visionary and me into a footnote that never appeared in print. When a reporter asked whether I had contributed to LumenCore, Natalie smiled toward me and said, "Amelia is wonderful at making a home feel calm. But advanced photonics requires more than enthusiasm and a few old college notebooks." A cluster of executives laughed. Richard did not correct her. I had spent the previous hour waiting for the promise he had made me in our kitchen 3 weeks earlier. He had held both my hands and said, "At the launch, I will tell them where it began. I will put your name on the screen. I swear." Instead, he thanked Natalie for translating genius into a global movement. He thanked his board. He thanked investors who had never touched an optical bench. He thanked a celebrity consultant who had changed the product's color from charcoal to pearl white. He even thanked the hotel staff. He did not say my name once. I stepped closer to the stage and waited until the applause faded. "Richard," I said, keeping my voice low. "You forgot the inventor." Natalie turned before he did. "This is not the moment for a domestic scene." "It is not domestic," I replied. "The self-correcting lattice, the thermal routing layer, and the original signal architecture came from my designs. The product on that screen was built from work I began before this company existed." The nearest microphones caught every word. Conversations died across the hall. Richard's expression changed not to guilt, but to rage. For 1 second, I saw the private man beneath the polished founder persona. Natalie lifted her wineglass and gave me a look of theatrical pity. "You should be proud of your husband instead of trying to steal his success." "I am not stealing anything," I said. "I am asking him to stop stealing from me." Richard took the glass from Natalie's hand. I thought he was moving it away before she spilled it. Instead, he stepped toward me and threw the wine directly into my face. The liquid struck my eyes, my nose, and the front of the cream-colored dress my mother had once helped me choose. The room blurred red. A few people gasped. Someone near the press line whispered, "Oh me God!" Richard laughed once, sharp and breathless, then pointed at me, as though I had become the danger. "Do not try to steal my success," he said loudly. "You abandoned research years ago. You are an uneducated housewife with a memory problem." 300 powerful people watched in silence. I did not slap him. I did not scream. I took the linen handkerchief from the breast pocket of a stunned investor standing beside me and wiped the wine from my eyes. My hands were steady because the humiliation had not surprised me. Only the timing had. Richard had finally done in public what he had been doing privately for years: erase me, then punish me for noticing. I opened my phone and called one number. My father answered on the first ring. "Amelia, Dad," I said, looking directly at Richard. "Come inside." There was a pause of less than a second. "What happened?" He attacked the inventor. "I am at the east entrance." He replied, "Stay where you are." I ended the call. Natalie laughed softly. "Did you call someone to drive you home?" I folded the stained handkerchief and placed it on an empty tray. "No. I called the man who owns the patents your launch depends on." The ballroom doors opened. Every executive from Hayes Research Institute stood before my father had taken 3 steps into the hall. Then the venture partners stood. Then the directors who recognized Dr. Samuel Hayes from the licensing negotiations Richard had deliberately kept me away from. Chairs scraped across the floor in a wave. Conversation stopped. Camera operators swung toward the entrance. My father entered in a dark suit with his silver hair combed straight back. He did not look at the giant product display. He did not acknowledge Richard's board chairman, who hurried forward with an anxious smile. He walked directly to me and saw the wine dripping from my hair. The expression on his face became very still. "Who?" he asked, his voice carrying through the hall without a microphone. "Just attacked the real inventor." No one answered. Richard tried to recover first. "Dr. Hayes, this is a private marital disagreement. Amelia is emotional. She is making claims she cannot support." My father turned his head slowly. "Your company is launching a processor built on 6 patents owned by my institute. The license remains valid only while Amelia Hayes serves as chief scientific authority over any commercial derivative. That condition is written into every agreement you signed." The chairman of the board stopped halfway across the room. Natalie's face lost its color. Richard gave a strained laugh. "There must be some confusion. Amelia has never held an executive role here. That," my father said, "is the first problem." 2 people entered behind him. The first was Evelyn Shaw, the patent attorney who had filed my earliest disclosures 11 years ago. The second was Daniel Kim, general counsel for Hayes Research Institute. Evelyn carried a black archival case. Daniel held a sealed evidence bag containing a silver external drive. My father looked toward the control booth. "Restore the presentation screen." Richard stepped forward. "You cannot take over my launch." The lead investor, Conrad Bell, rose from the front table. "Actually, Richard, until we understand whether your company has a valid license, this launch is suspended." The room erupted in whispers. Evelyn placed the archival case on a table beneath the stage. She opened it carefully and removed the first of my original engineering notebooks. The cover was worn blue cloth. My initials were stamped in the lower corner. Inside were dated diagrams of the adaptive photonic lattice that had become the heart of LumenCore. She held one page beneath the document camera. My signature appeared at the bottom beside the date April 18. 11 years earlier, another page showed Richard's handwriting in the margin. He had written, "Brilliant. May I model this for the startup proposal?" The screen changed again. Daniel displayed an email Richard had sent me 6 years earlier. "Amelia, I need written permission to incorporate your phase correction architecture into the prototype. You will be recognized as co-inventor and will lead research once we secure funding. I cannot proceed without you." A reporter near the aisle began typing so quickly that her keyboard clicks were audible. Richard's face tightened. "Old emails do not prove she built the commercial product." "You are correct," I said. "That is why we also brought the revision history." Daniel connected the silver drive. A time-stamped repository appeared on the screen. It showed hundreds of design changes, simulation results, and annotated failures. My username appeared throughout the first 3 years. Richard's appeared later, mostly on financing decks and requests for simplified diagrams. Then another folder opened. Natalie moved toward the control booth. "This is confidential corporate information." Conrad Bell blocked her path. "Sit down." The folder was titled Authorship Cleanup. Inside were messages between Natalie and the head of corporate communications. "Remove Amelia Hayes from all technical timelines. Replace co-invented with inspired by Richard Vail's early vision." Delete references to Hayes Institute conditions from media packets. Do not allow Amelia access to launch rehearsals. A second message was more direct. Once the global contracts are signed, Richard can remove her permanently. We only need the marriage to survive through launch week. The room seemed to contract around us. Richard looked at Natalie. For the first time that evening, she avoided his eyes. My father turned to me. Do you want to stop now? I understood what he was asking. He would close the licensing agreement with one sentence. The product would become legally unusable. The company's valuation would collapse. And Richard's name would become synonymous with fraud before midnight. That was the kind of power Samuel Hayes possessed. It was also the kind of power I had spent half my life refusing to use. No, I said. Not yet. Richard's relief lasted less than a second. I walked toward the stage. Wine still darkened my dress. I did not hide it. I wanted every camera to record exactly how the evening had begun. I am not asking this company to rename itself after me. I said. I am not asking for applause. I am asking for the scientific record to be corrected. For every employee who was ordered to erase my work to be protected, and for Richard Vale to step away from the board while an independent investigation examines how this product was represented to investors. Richard seized the microphone from its stand. This is extortion. She is using her father to take my company because she is jealous of Natalie. I looked at him. Your company. The screen behind us changed to the capitalization table. Hayes Research Institute held the foundational intellectual property. My family trust held a 22% protective equity stake created during the seed round. Conrad Bell's fund held 27%. Employees and smaller investors held most of the rest. Richard personally controlled less than 9%. He had built a public identity around ownership he did not possess, using an invention he had not created and a marriage he planned to discard. Conrad stood. The board will convene immediately. Richard's voice rose. You cannot do this during my launch. My father looked at the red stain across my face. You ended your launch when you assaulted the person whose consent makes your product legal. Security did not touch Richard. They did not need to. The people who had spent the evening competing to shake his hand were already stepping away from him. Natalie moved toward a side exit. Daniel Kim called her name. Ms. Cross. Please remain available. We have evidence that authorship records were destroyed under your direction. She stopped. The giant screen behind us displayed the launch slogan Richard had chosen: the future belongs to those who invent it. For the first time that night, the words were true. 10 years before that ballroom fell silent. Richard Vale was not a celebrated founder. He was a brilliant, impatient systems engineer with 2 failed startups, a rented office above a bicycle shop, and a talent for making other people believe the future had already chosen him. I met him at Hayes Research Institute during a winter symposium on energy-efficient computing. I had just completed my doctorate in electrical engineering and applied physics. My research focused on using light rather than electric current to move information through dense computing systems. Conventional processors lost enormous amounts of energy as heat. I was trying to build an architecture that could redirect optical signals around microscopic defects and temperature changes without stopping the calculation. Most people at the symposium treated my work as elegant but impractical. Richard did not. He waited until the final question ended, followed me into the corridor, and spent 40 minutes challenging the assumptions in my thermal model. He was irritating, quick, and genuinely curious. When I explained that my prototype could recover from local signal distortion, he said, "That is not a laboratory trick. That is an industry." I should have heard the difference between those 2 statements. I heard admiration. He heard an opportunity. At the beginning, we were good together. Richard had courage, where I had caution. I could spend months proving that a design would survive every foreseeable failure. He could walk into a room with a rough prototype and make people imagine a world built around it. We balanced each other. At least, that was what I believed. My mother? Claire Hayes. I liked him immediately. She had never been impressed by wealth or titles, but she appreciated energy. She said Richard entered every room as if someone had just announced a race. My father was less certain. Samuel respected Richard's intelligence, but disliked the way he described collaborative work with singular pronouns. He says my when he means ours. Dad told me after one family dinner, he is excited. I said, excitement reveals habits. It does not excuse them. I defended Richard because loving someone often begins with translating their worst qualities into more flattering language. Ambition became drive. Impatience became vision. Possessiveness became devotion. Every warning arrived wearing a disguise I helped create. 2 years after we married, my mother was diagnosed with an aggressive neurological cancer. The disease moved faster than any of us could accept. I reduced my hours at the institute, then stopped working in the laboratory entirely. I told everyone it was temporary. I moved between hospital rooms, insurance calls, experimental treatment consultations, and the quiet duties. No medical chart records, brushing my mother's hair when her hands shook. Reading novels aloud when her eyes could no longer focus. Pretending not to notice when she hid her fear to protect me. During those months, Richard became the version of himself I wanted to believe was permanent. He brought food to the hospital. He slept in waiting room chairs. He told my mother that when she recovered, she would sit in the front row at our first major product launch. She did not recover. After her funeral, I could not return to the optical bench. Every corridor at the institute contained her memory because she had helped my father build the place. The smell of machine oil reminded me of childhood afternoons spent waiting for both of them to finish experiments. The blue safety lights in the clean room looked like the glow from the monitors beside her hospital bed. I took a formal leave and told my father I needed time. Richard said, "Let me carry the work until you are ready." I believed that sentence meant he would protect it. My original notebooks remained in a secure archive at Hayes Institute, but Richard had copies of the simulation files and early prototype models because we had worked together at home. He formed a company called Veil Quantum Systems, later renamed Valian Technologies. He told investors that he was commercializing a family of energy-efficient optical processors developed through years of independent research. At first, he still used the word we. In private presentations, he described me as co-inventor, en grande application. My name appeared in the technical history. When journalists requested interviews, he said, I was grieving and preferred privacy. That was true. It was also useful to him. The first erasure was so small, I almost ignored it. A technology magazine published a profile calling Richard the sole architect of a revolutionary self-healing photonic lattice. I showed him the article at breakfast. They simplified it. He said, "Journalists need one face. You could correct them." I will. After the next funding round, we cannot confuse investors right now. Then a conference brochure listed me as an informal scientific advisor. Richard blamed the event organizer. A patent presentation omitted 2 of my diagrams. Richard blamed the legal team. A documentary crew filmed our home and referred to me as the supportive wife who created a peaceful environment for innovation. Richard said the director wanted emotional contrast. Each time, recognition was postponed to a future moment that seemed reasonable enough to wait for. The money grew. The rented room above the bicycle shop became a glass headquarters with biometric doors and a rooftop garden. Richard hired hundreds of engineers. He purchased a hillside home with walls of windows and told reporters it symbolized transparency. He began wearing custom suits and speaking in phrases that sounded manufactured for magazine covers. I remained legally connected to the technology because my father had insisted on a protective structure before the first seed investment. Hayes Research Institute owned the foundational patents. Valian received an exclusive commercial license under several conditions, including continued scientific oversight by the designated inventor, me. I had agreed to remain temporarily inactive while grieving. But the contract preserved my authority. Richard knew every clause. He had signed them in my father's office. What he counted on was my reluctance to enforce them. My marriage became a sequence of closed doors. Richard stopped discussing laboratory decisions with me. He changed the password to the company repository. He said the board worried that my family connection created governance confusion. When I challenged him, he kissed my forehead and said he was protecting me from stress. Then Natalie Cross arrived. She had built her career transforming mediocre executives into cultural symbols. She understood that markets did not simply buy products, they bought narratives. Within 6 months, Valian's story had changed. The company was no longer a collaboration between science and commercialization. It was the legend of Richard Vale, a rebellious genius who had supposedly sketched Lumencore on a restaurant napkin after being told optical computing was impossible. The napkin never existed. Natalie created it for a magazine photo shoot. She also created a public version of me. In interviews, she described me as Richard's grounding influence. She arranged photographs of me in our kitchen beside bowls of fruit and books I had not selected. She encouraged me to discuss grief, marriage, and the importance of supporting visionary spouses. Every sentence I spoke about science disappeared from the final edits. You have a warm, relatable presence, Natalie told me after one recording. The technical material makes audiences disconnect. I am the technical material, I replied. She smiled as though I had made a charming joke. I suspected the affair before I could prove it. Richard began traveling with Natalie, even when the chief technology officer attended the same events. Their messages arrived late at night. He turned his phone face down whenever I entered a room. A hotel receipt showed 1 suite instead of 2. When I asked, he accused me of becoming paranoid because I had not returned to professional life. The cruelty of that accusation was precise. Richard knew I feared grief had changed me. He used that fear as a lock. I might have confronted the affair sooner if another problem had not appeared. A former Valian engineer named Priya Nandakumar contacted me through an encrypted account. Priya had worked on the authorship database and noticed that early design records were being altered. She also discovered invoices from a company called North Star Narrative Labs. The company received nearly $4 million over 18 months for brand architecture, launch analytics, and strategic media procurement. North Star had no real office, no employees listed beyond a registered agent, and no visible clients. Its beneficial owner was Natalie Cross. The money came from Valian, not the charitable foundation in Video 2. But the pattern was just as dangerous. Corporate funds categorized as product development expenses were moving into a company controlled by the CEO's mistress. Some of those expenses had been represented to investors as qualifying research costs. Others were charged against restricted development grants tied to public interest energy programs. I did not tell Richard what I knew. Instead, I returned to the one skill grief had never taken from me: patient observation. I reactivated my access through Hayes Institute's Patent Audit Authority. The license allowed the institute to inspect any derivative work for compliance. Valian's lawyers had treated that clause as ceremonial. It was not. I began reviewing archived repositories, expense records, prototype logs, and board communications. Every layer revealed another lie. Richard had not merely omitted my name from public materials. Natalie's team had directed engineers to rewrite commit histories so that technical milestones appeared under Richard's account. They had deleted internal videos showing me leading early design reviews. They had replaced the title Amelia Hayes Principal Inventor with Foundational Research Contributor. Then they had removed even that. A young database administrator objected. He was terminated 2 days later for cultural misalignment. The financial records were worse. North Star paid for a furnished penthouse 2 blocks from Valion headquarters. The leaseholder was Natalie. Corporate funds covered private flights to Paris, Kyoto, and the Maldives, each described as international launch research. A jeweler's invoice for a $98,000 sapphire bracelet was recorded as a prototype visualization asset. Richard approved every payment. Still, I waited. I needed more than evidence of an affair and misuse of funds. I needed proof of intent, proof that Richard understood the license conditions and planned to remove me after the launch. Without that, he could claim the attribution failures were communication errors. He could sacrifice Natalie, apologize publicly, and continue controlling the company. The proof arrived 3 weeks before the gala. Priya obtained a recording from a conference room used by the executive team. The recording existed because Valion automatically captured hybrid meetings for absent participants. Natalie had forgotten to end the session after the final remote attendee disconnected. Her voice came first. Once the launch contracts are executed, Amelia becomes a liability. The board cannot keep treating her like an invisible veto. Richard replied, "The license can be challenged. She has not worked in the lab for years. The inventor condition is explicit. Then we question her competence. Grief, depression, professional abandonment. We build a record that she is emotionally unstable and scientifically obsolete." Natalie laughed. And personally, a chair moved. Richard's voice came closer to the microphone. Personally, the marriage ends after the contracts become irrevocable. There was a pause, followed by the unmistakable sound of a kiss. I listened to the recording alone in my father's old conference room. I expected devastation. Instead, I felt a strange calm, as though a machine that had produced an unexplained noise for years had finally been opened to reveal the broken part. Richard had not simply fallen out of love. He had converted our marriage into a temporary licensing strategy. I met my father that evening. He wanted to suspend the patents immediately. "No," I said, "Amelia. He intends to declare you unstable and steal your work." "I know. Then why are we allowing him another day? Because if we stop him privately, he will call it a family dispute. He will tell investors, you are punishing him for leaving me. Natalie will erase the remaining records, and the employees who helped us will become targets." My father studied me. "What do you want?" "I want the launch to proceed until every claim is public. Every contract is visible. And every person in that room has heard him call himself the sole inventor. Then I want the truth presented in the same place. That is dangerous." So was trusting him. Dad agreed on 3 conditions. First, Hayes Institute Council would remain at the hotel. Second, the foundational license would not automatically terminate without my authorization. Third, I would not confront Richard alone if he became violent. I accepted the first 2 conditions and believed I could avoid the third. The gala invitation arrived the next morning. My name appeared beneath Richard's in smaller type Amelia Vale. Spouse of the founder. I called him. "You promised to acknowledge me at the launch." "I will," he said. "There will be a dedicated moment after the product demonstration. Will my name appear as inventor A? Silence. Do not turn this into a legal negotiation. Amelia, trust me one last time." I looked at the original blue notebook on my desk. "One last time," I said. He mistook the words for surrender. The emergency board meeting began 12 minutes after Richard threw the wine. Hotel staff transformed a private dining room into a temporary command center. Directors filed in carrying phones that would not stop vibrating. The launch live stream had already been clipped and reposted thousands of times. Reporters were broadcasting from the lobby. Valion stock did not trade publicly, but secondary market bids were vanishing in real time. I changed into a black hotel robe because the wine had soaked through my dress. My father offered to have clothes brought from home. I declined. The stain mattered. I wanted the board to remember that the governance crisis began with an assault they had witnessed and did not stop. Richard entered with 2 attorneys from Valian's outside firm. Natalie followed, no longer touching him. She had changed her expression from triumph to professional concern. Conrad Bell took the chair at the head of the table. This meeting is called to determine whether the company retains legal authority to launch Porten, sell, demonstrate, or contract around Lumencore. Richard sat opposite me. This meeting is invalid. I am Chief Executive Officer. You are also the subject of an emergency conduct review. Conrad replied. You will listen. Daniel Kim distributed copies of the patent license. The key clause appeared on the first page of every packet. Any commercial derivative incorporating the Hayes adaptive photonic lattice shall remain under the continuing scientific authority of the designated inventor, Dr. Amelia Hayes, or a successor approved in writing by both Dr. W.com, Hayes and Hayes Research Institute. The language was not ambiguous. Valian's lead attorney, Martin Sloan, adjusted his glasses. We were told Dr. N.T. Hayes had voluntarily declined an operational role. Who told you? I asked. Martin looked toward Richard. Richard leaned forward. Amelia did decline. She left the field. She has not attended a product meeting in years. That is false. I said. I reviewed the thermal routing redesign, the waveguide defect compensation, and the failure model for the second prototype. My comments were submitted through your personal account because you said the team would be distracted by my family name. I placed copies of 3 email threads on the table. Each contained technical analysis from me, followed by Richard forwarding the same analysis to engineers without attribution. A director named Helen Ward read the first thread twice. Richard, you presented these recommendations as your own during the Series C diligence process. They came through me. That is not an answer. Natalie intervened. The public does not understand collaborative development. We created a simplified narrative. Every major company does this. I turned toward her. Did every major company also create a private shell corporation to receive $4 million from restricted research funds? The room became silent again. Natalie's eyes narrowed. That allegation is defamatory. Daniel slid a second packet across the table. It contained the registration records for North Star Narrative Labs, the lease for Natalie's penthouse, invoices approved by Richard, and a flowchart showing the transfer of grant-linked funds. Richard did not look at the documents. Those services were legitimate. What services? Conrad asked. Brand development, market research, international positioning. Helen lifted one invoice. $184,000 for experiential product immersion in the Maldives, Natalie said. We were meeting sovereign investors. Name them. She could not. The board ordered an immediate preservation hold on all company accounts and data. No file could be deleted. No payment could leave the company without dual authorization. Natalie's administrative access was suspended. Richard's authority over finance and personnel was frozen pending investigation. That should have been enough to end the evening. It was only the first act. As corporate security escorted Natalie to a separate interview room, she turned to me and whispered, "You think your father makes you powerful? He only makes you protected." I replied, "Protection is what you call power when it belongs to someone else." Richard remained at the table after the directors left. My father stood near the window, speaking quietly with Conrad. Richard waited until they were distracted, then moved his chair closer to me. "You planned this," he said. "I planned to present evidence. I did not plan for you to throw wine. You provoked me in front of everyone. I stated that the product came from my designs. You tried to destroy the moment I built for 10 years. The moment you built from my work." His voice lowered. Do you understand what you have done? Thousands of employees depend on this company. Their stock options, their mortgages, their children's futures. You risked all of it because Natalie hurt your feelings. There it was, the old mechanism. He converted his choices into my responsibility and his cruelty into evidence of my selfishness. I protected those employees by stopping you from signing contracts the company could not legally perform. I said, "You knew the license condition. The condition was your father's way of controlling us. You requested the license. I created the commercial value, and I created the technology." He stared at me for a long moment. "If you force me out, the company will collapse. You are not a leader, Amelia. You disappear when life becomes difficult. You left the laboratory. You left the board. You left me alone to carry everything." My mother's hospital room flashed through my memory. Richard had been there, but not as often as I remembered. Laughter? I discovered that many of the nights he claimed to be working were the same nights he first met Natalie. I left the laboratory to care for my dying mother. I said, "You turned my grief into a vacancy and moved into it." For the first time, he had no prepared answer. Hotel security entered and asked him to surrender his executive access badge. He refused until Conrad returned and told him the board vote had been unanimous. "You cannot remove the founder," Richard said. Conrad looked tired rather than angry. "We are not removing the founder. We are suspending a chief executive who misrepresented intellectual property, concealed related party transactions, and assaulted a co-inventor on camera." Richard placed the badge on the table. Before leaving, he looked at me and said, "This company will choose me when the panic ends." I wanted to believe the worst was over. At 2:14 inches the morning, Priya called. "Amelia. Someone is inside the backup repository. I was in a hotel suite with my father, Evain, and Daniel, reviewing the launch contracts. Who I cannot identify the account. It is using a maintenance credential. But the access pattern is wrong. They are trying to overwrite the authorship ledger. Can you block it? I can slow it down. The system is mirrored to an off-site facility. But the mirror has not completed since yesterday." Daniel opened his laptop. "Where is the off-site facility?" Priya hesitated. "Valian's original prototype lab in Redwood City. The lab had been decommissioned 6 months earlier. Richard told the board it was empty. Call the police." My father said. Priya answered. "I already did. But there is something else." The intruder opened a folder named Orpheus. I knew the name. Orpheus was the internal code name for my earliest adaptive routing model. The version that predated every filed patent. I had created it on an isolated workstation at Hayes Institute. No commercial employee should have possessed a copy. "How did Valian get Orpheus?" Daniel asked. I looked at Richard's old email, asking permission to model my work. I had sent him a limited demonstration package. The complete model remained offline, unless someone had taken it from my home. During my mother's illness, I kept an encrypted archive in a safe behind the bookshelves in our study. Richard knew the safe existed, but claimed he never knew the code. After the funeral, I stopped checking it. "Dad," I said, "we need to go to my house." The safe door was open when we arrived. Nothing obvious had been stolen. My mother's jewelry remained in a velvet case. Property records, family photographs, and old passports were untouched. But the black data cartridge containing my pre-patent simulations was gone. A dust outline showed where it had rested. The home security system recorded no forced entry. The last authorized opening of the safe occurred 14 months earlier, using Richard's biometric profile. He had lied about lacking access. Police reached the Redwood City lab at 3:02 a.m. They found a contracted data technician attempting to remove 2 server drives. He claimed Natalie had hired him to perform an emergency compliance backup. His phone contained messages from an encrypted contact instructing him to delete revision metadata, preserve only files associated with Richard, and destroy any copy marked AH. The contact identifier was not Natalie's. It belonged to Richard. By sunrise, the scandal had expanded beyond authorship. We now had evidence of attempted destruction of records after a legal hold, theft of proprietary research from my home, and conspiracy to alter a patent history during an active financing event. My father wanted Richard arrested immediately. Daniel cautioned that the local police were still establishing the chain of evidence. Valian's attorneys warned that a public accusation without formal charges could trigger retaliatory litigation. I sat beside the hotel window watching dawn turn the city, pale gold. Reporters remained below. Gathered behind barriers, my face appeared on every screen, first clean and composed, then covered in wine, then standing beside my father beneath the words "real inventor." I had spent years avoiding publicity. Now strangers were arguing about whether I existed. At chapter 13. An unknown number sent me a photograph. It showed Richard and Natalie in the Redwood City lab 2 nights earlier. They stood beside a sealed shipping case marked Hayes Institute Archival Property. The message beneath it read, "They are moving more than files. Ask about Prototype 3. I showed the photograph to Priya. Her expression changed. Prototype 3 was destroyed. According to whom? According to Richard. There was a thermal cascade during testing. He said the optical core cracked and the unit was scrapped. Did you see it destroyed? No. Prototype 3 was not simply another development unit. It was the first device that demonstrated full adaptive correction under sustained commercial load. If intact, it would prove that the essential architecture had been completed while I was still actively contributing. It also contained a physical security module signed with my private research key. Richard had not only erased my name, he had hidden the machine that could not operate without it. We returned to the Redwood City lab with police authorization and ATN behind a false wall in a storage room. Officers found a climate-controlled chamber. Inside were 4 shipping cases. The first held Prototype 3. The second held engineering notebooks belonging to employees who had left the company. The third contained dozens of drives labeled with altered project names. The fourth was empty except for packing foam cut in the shape of a compact optical core. Priya examined the dimensions. This is the Lumen Core Validation Unit. The one scheduled for delivery to the Federal Energy Consortium tomorrow. The unit was missing. That delivery mattered more than the Gala. Valian had promised to provide a production-equivalent processor for independent validation. If the device passed, a $900 million consortium contract would activate. If Valian failed to deliver, investors could terminate funding. If someone delivered a unit with altered records or unauthorized software, the consequences could include federal procurement fraud. Richard's phone was off. Natalie's attorney claimed not to know her location. Their access badges had been disabled. But both had left the hotel before the preservation order reached security. Conrad called an emergency investor meeting. "We have less than 24 hours before the validation deadline," he said. "Can the company build another unit?" The chief technology officer, Dr. Owen Park, shook his head. "Not with the calibrated lattice. Each core requires Amelia's phase key during final alignment." Every face turned toward me. I had not used the phase key in nearly 4 years. Richard had publicly called me obsolete. Privately, he had preserved the one component only I could authorize. "Where is the production line?" I asked. "Oakland." "How many unfinished cores?" 3. "How long to complete?" 1. Owen hesitated. "With the original inventor, maybe 18 hours. Without her, impossibly." The board expected me to save the contract that Richard had used to erase me. I could have refused. Legally, I had every reason. Emotionally, Part of me wanted the company to experience the consequences of believing one charismatic man mattered more than the truth. Then I thought about the engineers who had spent years building the production line, the public laboratories waiting for lower energy computing, and the medical researchers whose imaging systems depended on the consortium program. LumenCore was bigger than Richard's theft. It had been bigger than both of us from the beginning. I will complete the unit, I said. Under 3 conditions. Conrad nodded. First, the board publicly recognizes every inventor and contributing team before validation. Second, all North Star payments are frozen and independently audited. Third, Richard and Natalie have no access to any facility, account, or employee. Agreed, Conrad said. Owen added, there is a 4th condition. What you lead the lab? For years. The idea of returning to an optical bench had tightened my chest. That morning, it felt different. My mother was still present in the work. But not only in the memory of losing her, she was present in the curiosity she had given me, in the patience she taught when experiments failed, and in the conviction that knowledge belonged to those willing to protect it. I lead the lab, I said. We entered the Oakland facility at 912 a.m. The engineers had seen the video. Some avoided my eyes, ashamed that they had believed Richard's story. Others looked at me with cautious hope. Priya stood beside the calibration station. Owen handed me a cleanroom suit with my name printed across the chest. Not Amelia Vale. Dr. Amelia Hayes. I put it on. The first unfinished core waited beneath white light, smaller than my palm and more valuable than the building around it. Its lattice channels formed a geometric pattern I had first drawn beside my mother's hospital bed while she slept. I placed my hands on the controls. Let us finish what they tried to steal, I said. The first 6 hours in the Oakland lab passed without anyone mentioning the Gala. Science has a way of reducing drama to variables. A waveguide either holds alignment or it does not be. A thermal layer either carries heat away from the active lattice or it fails. Light does not care who has the larger office, who appears on a magazine cover, or whose name is printed across a stage. It obeys structure. That was why I had always loved the laboratory. Owen assigned 2 senior engineers to verify every command I entered. The decision was not an insult. After years away from daily operations, I wanted independent checks. Priya monitored the repository while a hardware team rebuilt the security stack from clean backups. We isolated the production network from every external connection and required 2-person authentication for each change. At noon, one of the younger engineers, Luis Moreno, approached my station carrying a tablet. Dr. Hayes, I need to show you something before we proceed with phase locking. He displayed a thermal map from the most recent prototype. A narrow band near the lower edge showed repeated spikes. That should have triggered a shutdown, I said. It did in the original firmware. The threshold was raised 3 months ago. By whom Luis opened the changelog. The approval appeared under Richard's executive account, with a note that lower thresholds created visually disruptive interruptions during demonstrations. He had weakened a safety control so the device would not pause on stage. How serious? Owen asked. Luis enlarged the map. Under normal loads. Manageable. Under the consortium stress test. The substrate could deform. Best case. Performance drops. Worst case. The optical core fractures. $1 billion launch had been built around a machine that might destroy itself during independent validation because Richard valued uninterrupted theater more than engineering limits. Restore the original threshold, I said. Then determine why the lower edge is heating. The answer arrived 40 minutes later. Natalie's brand team had insisted that the production housing be 4 millimeters thinner to match the launch renderings. Manufacturing compressed an insulating channel to preserve the appearance. Richard approved the change despite written objections from engineering. The product had literally been redesigned around a photograph. We could not repair the housing in time. Instead, I adapted an old concept from my pre-patent work: dynamic routing that moved high-intensity calculations away from warming regions before deformation began. It required rewriting part of the correction model and recalibrating the lattice by hand. For the first time in years, I stopped thinking about Richard. My mind entered the deep quiet I had once believed grief had stolen permanently. Equations became spatial relationships. Temperature gradients became paths. I saw the processor, not as a device, but as a city of light. Every signal searching for the safest route through changing terrain. At doi obsprezece. M. The first test stabilized. The lab erupted in applause. I raised one hand. Again. Double the load. At 3-4. The second test held. At 4-11. The system survived a simulated defect that had destroyed the previous model. Owen stared at the screen. You just increased sustained performance by 14%. No, I said. The team did. Put every name in the record. Luis looked as though I had spoken in a language he had forgotten existed. At 4:13. Natalie called me from an unknown number. I stepped into a glass conference room, but kept Priya and Daniel on the line as witnesses. Amelia. Natalie began. We need to stop letting men turn this into a war between us. I almost admired the speed of her transformation. 12 hours earlier, she had called me an uneducated housewife. Now she wanted solidarity. Where are you? I asked. My attorney advised me not to disclose that. Then this will be brief. Richard lied to both of us. That does not erase what you did. I shaped a narrative. That was my job. He told me you had abandoned the patents and that your father used the license to control him. He said you were emotionally unstable and refused to participate. You read the inventor clause. Silence. You ordered my name removed from technical histories. I continued. You paid your own company with restricted funds. You arranged the deletion of authorship data. I can explain the payments. Explain them to the auditors. Her voice sharpened. You need me. Richard did not move the validation unit alone. He has a buyer. Priya muted herself and typed a message on the shared screen. Keep her talking. What buyer? I asked. A foreign technology group. He planned to license an independent version of the core. After the consortium contract activated, the missing unit is his insurance. Where is it? I want immunity from Valian civil claims and confirmation that your father will not pursue me personally. You are negotiating with information that may concern stolen technology and federal procurement. I am protecting myself. You protected yourself when you destroyed records. Now you are deciding whether to cooperate. She exhaled. Richard has a private hangar at San Carlos Airport. The unit is in a chartered aircraft scheduled to leave at 6. Daniel immediately messaged federal investigators. Who is the buyer? I asked. I never met them. Richard called the contact Morrow. Send every message. Invoice. And recording you have. What do I receive the opportunity to tell the truth before someone else tells it for you? She laughed bitterly. You sound like your father. No. My father would have ended this call 30 seconds ago. Natalie sent a location pin and disconnected. Federal agents reached the hangar at 5375. The aircraft remained on the ground. But the validation unit was not inside. They found custom packing materials, forged export documents, and a prepaid satellite phone. The pilot said Richard canceled the flight 20 minutes earlier and transferred the case into a black delivery van. Security footage captured the van leaving toward San Francisco. The driver wore a Valian Facilities uniform. Priya identified him as Grant Mercer. To head of physical security, a former military contractor Richard had hired without board review. Grant controlled access cameras at every major Valian site. He also knew the locations of secure prototype storage. The missing unit was now mobile, and the validation deadline was less than 18 hours away. Conrad wanted to announce that the device had been stolen. Federal investigators asked us to delay public disclosure while they tracked the van. The consortium warned that failure to deliver by 1000 the next morning would automatically suspend the contract. We continued building the replacement. At čase 2:00. The cleanroom alarms activated. Red lights flashed along the ceiling. The ventilation system shut down, and magnetic doors locked. A synthetic voice announced a chemical contamination event. Owen looked at the environmental display. Sensors show solvent vapor in Zone 4. Zone 4 contained the calibration chamber and our nearly completed core. Everyone followed emergency protocol. We sealed the processor and evacuated through the secondary corridor. Fire crews arrived within minutes. Their instruments found no solvent leak. The alarm was false. But during the evacuation, someone attempted to access the sealed calibration chamber using an emergency override code. Only 6 people knew the code. One was Richard. Another was Grant Mercer. The system rejected the remote request because Priya had disconnected external controls. If she had not, the chamber would have opened during evacuation, leaving the core unattended. They are not only stealing the first unit, Priya said, they are trying to stop us from creating a second. Federal agents placed guards at every entrance. Employee devices were scanned. The false alarm originated from a maintenance terminal in the loading bay. Camera footage showed a man in a fire inspection jacket entering 30 minutes earlier with forged credentials. He left before the alarm. Inside the maintenance terminal, investigators found a small transmitter and a note taped beneath the desk. Amelia cannot validate what she cannot touch. Richard wanted me to know. My father read the note and turned toward Daniel. End the license now. No. I said, Amelia. He has escalated from theft to sabotage. And if we terminate the license before delivering the replacement, the employees lose the contract, and Richard claims I destroyed the company. I no longer care what he claims. I do. Not for him. For the record. Dad's anger was protective. But protection can become control when fear takes over. We had argued about this throughout my childhood. He solved danger by closing doors. My mother solved it by teaching me how to walk through them. Trust me, I said. He looked at the cleanroom window, then back at me. That phrase has caused enough damage in this family. Then do not trust blindly. Watch me. He finally nodded. At up to 0 p.m. Valian's board issued a public statement identifying me as principal inventor of the foundational architecture and announcing Richard's suspension. The statement also confirmed an independent financial and authorship investigation within minutes. Former employees began contacting the hotline Daniel had created. One message came from Dr. Nada's Minesha, who led the materials team during the earliest prototypes. She had resigned after Richard pressured her to sign a document crediting him with a coding process she developed. Another came from Eric Cho, a software architect fired after refusing to delete my name from the repository. A third came from Richard's former executive assistant, Hanamavas Yulia Khan, and she possessed a calendar no one knew existed. Julia explained that Richard maintained a private schedule separate from Valian's official system. It included meetings with Natalie, Grant Mercer, shell company lawyers, and a representative listed only as Morrow. Julia had copied the calendar before resigning because she feared Richard would blame her for irregular travel expenses. The next scheduled meeting with Morrow was at 1130 that night in a private club beneath the Transamerica Pyramid. Federal investigators prepared surveillance. I wanted to go. No. Daniel said. Absolutely not. If Richard sees only investigators, he may refuse to identify the buyer. If Richard sees you, He may become violent. He has already become violent. That is my point. The lead federal agent, Special Agent Lena Ortiz, proposed a compromise. I would remain in a secured vehicle with audio access. Agents would use Julia's credentials to confirm the meeting. If Richard attempted to transfer the unit, they would intervene. Atunci 18. We parked across from the club's service entrance. Rain began tapping against the windshield. The city lights blurred across the glass. Richard arrived in a dark sedan, driven by Grant Mercer. Grant carried a silver transport case, matching the dimensions of the missing validation unit. A second car arrived 7 minutes later. A man stepped out wearing a long gray coat. Agent Ortiz recognized him from Export Control Intelligence. Victor Morrow was not a businessman. He brokered restricted technology for buyers willing to route it through neutral countries. The audio feed activated as the men entered a private room. Morrow spoke first. The press says your wife owns the patents. Richard replied, My wife owns nothing she can enforce without destroying her father's institute. The architecture has been substantially transformed. The unit is traceable. Not after the firmware rewrite. Grant placed the case on a table. Morrow asked, And the consortium validation. They will fail the deadline. Investors panic. I return with emergency financing from your group. The board reinstates me. Once I control the company again, we migrate the product outside the Hayes license. The plan was not an act of desperation. It was a coup. Morrow opened the transport case. Through the vehicle's video feed, I saw the validation core beneath layers of shock-resistant foam. Then Richard said something that changed the investigation again. The commercial unit is only half the package. I also have the biometric phase key. My hand moved instinctively toward the pendant at my neck. The phase key was not a physical card. It was a cryptographic pattern generated from a private biometric sequence I had established during early development. Richard could not possess it unless he had copied my authentication data. Morrow asked, Can you demonstrate control? Richard placed a small glass plate onto the table. Agent Ortiz enlarged the image. The plate held a partial fingerprint matrix and retinal response code. My data. I remembered a medical examination. Richard insisted I attend 2 years earlier. He said Valian's executive insurance required updated biometric records. The clinic belonged to a health technology company in which one of his shell entities invested. He had harvested my identity to unlock my own invention. Morrow connected the plate to a portable reader. The unit illuminated, then displayed an error, authority incomplete. Richard cursed. He had only part of the key. The complete authorization required a live challenge response, a dynamic pattern that changed with each use and could not be replayed from stolen data. I had designed it that way after watching my mother lose control of her medical records during treatment. Static identity could be copied. Living consent could not. Morrow closed the case. You promised a functional unit. It will work. You promised ownership. Your wife has both. Richard's voice became dangerous. Do not mention her as though she matters. Morrow stood. She appears to matter more than you. Grant reached inside his jacket. Agent Ortiz gave the signal. Federal agents entered from 3 directions. The audio feed filled with commands. Furniture scraping. And one sharp crash. Grant attempted to flee through the kitchen and was arrested in an alley. Morrow surrendered immediately. Richard grabbed the transport case and locked himself inside a service elevator. The elevator descended toward an underground garage. Agents moved to intercept, but the building's security system showed an emergency stop between floors. Richard had forced open the inner door and climbed into the maintenance shaft carrying the case. For 9 minutes, no one knew where he was. Then my phone rang. Richard. Agent Ortiz signaled for me to answer on speaker. Amelia. He said, breathing hard. Tell them to stand down. Where are you? You know what happens if this core is damaged. Years of work disappear. We are completing another. A pause. You cannot. We already did. His breathing changed. You always needed me. He said. No. Richard. I needed time to remember that I did not. You think your father will let you control the institute. He will put you behind a ceremonial title and run everything himself. This is not about my father. It has always been about him. I spent 10 years proving I belonged in rooms where everyone stood when Samuel Hayes entered. No matter what I built. I was still the man who married his daughter. There, it was the wound beneath his ambition. He had not only stolen my invention for wealth, he had stolen it to defeat my father's shadow. You could have built beside us. I said. I would never have been equal. So you decided no one else could be. Sirens echoed through his phone. Withdraw the complaint. He said. Restore my access. I will give back the unit and publicly credit you. You promised credit before. This time you have leverage. Truth should not require leverage. His voice cracked with fury. Then watch your precious invention fall. A metallic impact sounded over the line. Agent Ortiz's team located him on a maintenance platform above the garage. Richard stood near an open shaft holding the silver case over the edge. I saw the live body camera feed. One movement could destroy the core. Richard. I said. The device is evidence now. Dropping it adds another charge. You care more about this machine than you ever cared about me. No. I cared about you enough to mistake your hunger for love. He looked toward the agents. Then down into the shaft. For one terrible second. I thought he would jump with it. Instead, the case slipped. An agent lunged forward and caught the handle with one hand. Another pulled Richard away from the edge. The case struck the concrete platform, but remained closed. Richard was arrested at 1207A. M. The validation unit was recovered. When Agent Ortiz asked whether I wanted to see him, I said no. I returned to Oakland. The replacement core waited beneath the clean room lights, and the deadline was 9 hours away. At 1:10 inches the morning, the Oakland facility smelled of coffee, warm circuitry, and the faint sterile sharpness of filtered air. The engineers had been awake for nearly a full day, but no one suggested stopping. The deadline had transformed the lab into a single organism. People moved without wasted motion. Data passed from station to station. Every result was checked. Signed. And checked again. The recovered validation unit arrived under federal escort at 142. Its transport case had a dent from the maintenance platform. Before anyone opened it, I ordered a full forensic scan. Owen frowned. We can compare it to the replacement after validation. No. Richard said the firmware was rewritten. We assume contamination until proven otherwise. The unit was placed inside an isolated chamber with no connection to Valian's network. Priya created a read-only image of its storage. Within minutes, she found an encrypted process hidden beneath the diagnostic layer. It is not part of our architecture. She said, the process activated only when the core connected to an external validation system. It would copy test parameters, authentication certificates, and network topology to a concealed memory partition. Lauder. When the unit reached any internet-enabled environment, the information could be transmitted. Richard intended to deliver a surveillance device to a federal consortium. Whether he understood the full purpose or simply accepted Morrow's instructions did not matter. The act crossed another line. Agent Ortiz listened as Priya explained. Can you preserve the code without activating it? Yes. We will provide a forensic image and hardware hash. Do it? This now involves attempted intrusion into a protected government system. The engineers stared at the recovered unit as if it had become diseased. It looked identical to the product celebrated on the stage hours earlier. but inside it carried betrayal in executable form. I turned toward the replacement. That one is ours. Finish it. Atrei doazeci. We began final phase alignment. The process required the live authorization Richard had tried to counterfeit. I placed my hand on the biometric surface and looked into the optical reader. The system generated a random sequence of light pulses. My retinal response. Pulse variation. And live touch pattern formed a temporary key that existed for less than a second. Authority verified haze. Amelia. The words appeared across the monitor. A quiet sound moved through the room, not applause, but breath released by people who had spent years being told the inventor was absent. The lattice illuminated. For 3 minutes. Every channel held. Then channel 47 began to drift. Louise saw it first. Thermal deviation. Lower quadrant. The dynamic routing model shifted load away. But the drift continued. A microscopic defect in the substrate was producing feedback faster than our correction layer predicted. Owen looked at the clock. We can switch to Core 2. Core 2 has not completed optical bonding. Priya said. 6 hours minimum. We had less than 7. I enlarged the phase map. The defect pattern looked familiar. 11 years earlier, my first laboratory prototype developed a similar instability when one waveguide reflected energy into a neighboring path. I had solved it with a crude temporary structure I called a silence corridor, an intentionally unused region that absorbed phase noise by giving it nowhere productive to travel. Commercial engineers hated unused capacity. Every generation after mine had optimized the corridor away. Create a null band around channel 47. I said. Owen shook his head. We lose 8% throughput. We lose 100% if the lattice fractures. The consortium specification is within 5% of current output. Then recover performance elsewhere. Increase routing density in the upper quadrant after temperature stabilizes. Luis began entering the change. At 4:6. The drift slowed. At 4:19. It stopped. At 4:33. We regained 3% of the lost output. At 5:12. Another engineer found a way to recover 2 more. By 5:40. The core met every requirement with a safety margin that Richard's launch version never possessed. No one cheered this time. People simply looked at one another with exhausted certainty. We had done it correctly. After years of marketing deadlines, hidden compromises, and executive shortcuts, correctness felt almost radical. The consortium test site was 40 minutes away without traffic. Federal agents arranged an escort. The replacement unit left Oakland at 6:25 inches, a sealed vehicle accompanied by Owen, Priya, me, and 2 independent observers. As the city woke, news reports repeated the wine-throwing clip. Commentators debated intellectual property law. Former Valiant employees posted stories about Richard taking credit for their work. Hashtags with my name trended beside jokes about red wine and patent licenses. I turned off the screen. Public sympathy can feel like justice when it is new. But it is not the same thing. Sympathy moves quickly and forgets. The scientific record had to outlast the news cycle. At the validation facility, consortium officials met us in a windowless, secure room. Their director, Dr. Farah Mitchell, had known my mother. She did not mention the Gala. Dr. Hayes, she said. Are you prepared to certify this device? I am prepared to certify its architecture and this unit's chain of custody. The unit recovered from Richard Vale is compromised and must not be connected to any system. Agent Ortiz supplied the preliminary forensic notice. Testing began at 7:18. LumenCore processed medical imaging models, climate simulations, language workloads, and encrypted signal tasks. The temperature rose exactly as predicted. Dynamic routing moved computation around the lower quadrant. The silence corridor absorbed instability without affecting output. Performance remained above contract thresholds. Atno patruzec și șapte. 13 minutes before the deadline. Dr. Mitchell signed the validation certificate. The consortium contract did not activate automatically. Because of the governance investigation, the agency imposed conditions independent technical oversight. A revised compliance plan, removal of compromised executives, and confirmation that inventor authority remained valid. I signed the scientific certification. Conrad signed for the interim board. Richard's signature was not needed. When we stepped outside, reporters waited behind security barriers. I had not prepared a speech. Natalie would have hated that. A journalist shouted, "Dr. Hayes, did your husband steal your invention?" I stopped. Lumen Core was built by many people. I said, "My original architecture made it possible." And that fact was deliberately concealed. But this is not a story about replacing one false lone genius with another. The engineers who protected the work last night deserve to be named, and the employees who refused to destroy records deserve to be protected. The public deserves products whose safety is not sacrificed for a launch image. Another reporter asked whether I would take control of Valian. I will help stabilize the research program. Governance decisions belong to the board after a transparent review. Will you divorce Richard Vale? I looked at the cameras. My marriage is ending. The scientific record is beginning again. That sentence became the headline. At noon, Valian's board voted to remove Richard as chief executive officer for cause. He remained a minority shareholder, but his voting rights were suspended under the misconduct provisions of the company charter. Natalie was terminated for undisclosed related party transactions, evidence destruction, and breach of fiduciary duty. Grant Mercer was fired and detained, pending federal charges. Conrad asked me to become interim chief executive. No, I said. The directors stared at me as though refusal were irrational. I am a scientist. The company needs governance, finance, employee trust, and operational repair. Appoint an interim executive with no connection to Richard or my family. I will serve as chief research officer under a defined mandate. Helen Ward smiled for the first time since the gala. You understand leadership better than most chief executives. Understanding what I should not control is part of it. They appointed Maya Chen, a respected semiconductor executive known for rebuilding companies after compliance failures. She accepted on the condition that every senior officer undergo independent review and that the board create an employee ethics committee with real authority. My father approved of Maya. He disapproved of my decision not to take the top role. You have the leverage to reshape the entire company, he told me in his office that afternoon. I am reshaping the part I understand. Power surrendered is rarely returned. I am not surrendering power. I am refusing to confuse it with title. He walked to the window. Beneath us, the institute courtyard contained the small oak tree my mother planted when I was born. Your mother would have taken the role, he said. No. Mom would have asked whether she wanted it. He turned toward me, and I saw the old grief between us. He had survived my mother by converting sorrow into work. I had survived by leaving it. Neither method was complete. There is something I should have told you, he said. The sentence changed the temperature of the room. Dad opened a locked cabinet and removed a thin red folder. Inside was an amendment to the Valian licensing agreement signed 2 years earlier. Richard's signature appeared on the final page. So did my father's. The amendment allowed Valian to request replacement of the designated scientific authority if I was medically unable or professionally unwilling to serve for more than 18 consecutive months. Any replacement required certification by an independent panel selected jointly by Valian and Hayes Institute. I read the clause twice. Why did you sign this? Richard argued that investors needed continuity. You had declined every request to return. Did you tell me no? Why, you were barely functioning after your mother died. I believed the clause could never be used without my approval. Richard's recorded plan echoed in my mind: grief, depression, professional abandonment. We build a record that she is emotionally unstable and scientifically obsolete. He had been preparing to trigger the amendment. You gave him a legal path to erase me. I said, I gave the company a continuity mechanism. Without my knowledge, I was protecting your work while allowing it to survive your absence. No, you were making decisions about my capacity because you did not trust me to make them. Dad's expression hardened. You disappeared from the Institute for 4 years. I was grieving, and the work could not wait forever. There are betrayals committed for greed and betrayals committed in the name of protection. The second kind can be harder to confront because the person who hurt you believes love proves innocence. Richard planned to use this amendment to declare me professionally unwilling. I said, I would never have approved his panel. He believed he could pressure you after the consortium contract activated. He underestimated me. So did you? I closed the folder. For the first time since the Gala, I left without my father. The discovery did not excuse Richard. It did not reduce Natalie's responsibility. But it forced me to admit that the system enabling my erasure was larger than one marriage. My father, investors, lawyers, and directors had all made decisions about my work while treating my absence as empty space. Some were malicious. Others were practical. The result was the same. The inventor became an object to manage rather than a person with agency. I spent that night at my mother's old cottage in Half Moon Bay. She had left it to me, but I rarely visited after her death. The rooms remained simple white walls, worn wooden floors, shelves filled with field guides and mystery novels. On the kitchen table sat a ceramic bowl she had made badly and loved proudly. I found a box of her letters in the bedroom closet. One envelope bore my name. She had written it during treatment, but never given it to me. My dearest Amelia, if you are reading this, you are probably trying to decide what part of yourself you are allowed to keep after losing me. Keep all of it. Grief will tell you that continuing means leaving me behind. It is lying. Take me into the laboratory, into your marriage, into every room where you are afraid to be fully seen. Do not become smaller to make loss easier for other people to hold. I sat on the floor until sunrise with the letter in my hands. Richard had used my grief. My father had managed around it. I had hidden inside it. The next morning, I called Maya Chen. I will accept the chief research officer role. I said, but I want a new authorship charter, an independent inventor rights office, and employee access to outside counsel when executive pressure affects scientific records. Done, she replied. I also want the continuity amendment disclosed to the board and reviewed publicly within the company. There was a pause. That may embarrass Hayes Institute. It should. And your father, he will survive the truth. At no zero. I met with Dad and informed him that the amendment would be disclosed. He did not argue. Instead, he placed my mother's old laboratory key on the desk between us. She gave me this the week before she died. She said I would know when to return it to you. I picked up the key. Did she say anything else? Yes. She said not to mistake protecting you for owning your choices. A sad smile crossed his face. I have apparently required several years to understand the distinction. I reached across the desk and took his hand. Forgiveness did not arrive as a grand emotional release. It arrived as a boundary spoken clearly and respected. Never sign anything about my authority without me again. I said, never. He replied, that afternoon, Natalie requested a formal cooperation meeting. She arrived without the silver gown, the perfect makeup, or the confidence she wore at the launch. 2 attorneys accompanied her. She placed a sealed envelope on the table. This contains the complete North Star ledger, every message Richard sent about Amelia, and recordings of 3 meetings with Morrow. Her lawyer said, "Ms. Cross is prepared to cooperate with federal and civil investigations. Namur the Taption." I looked at Natalie. "Why now?" "Because Richard told investigators I created the entire scheme," she said. "He claims I seduced him, invented the authorship strategy, and stole the money without his knowledge." "Did you?" "I participated. I benefited. I also kept evidence because I never trusted him." She pushed a small recorder across the table. The most important file captured Richard speaking 2 months before the gala. "Once Amelia is removed under the continuity amendment, we assign the inventor authority to Owen or someone else controllable. Samuel will fight, but the board will remind him how much the Institute earns from royalties. Then we announce the divorce. Natalie becomes Chief Strategy Officer. North Star merges into Valian, and the story is complete." Natalie's recorded voice asked, "What happens to Amelia's equity? We challenge the trust. If necessary, we claim she concealed mental instability during the seed agreement." The recording ended, even after everything. Hearing the plan spoken so casually felt like another glass thrown into my face. Natalie watched me. He never planned to share control with me either. North Star was supposed to absorb the risk. Once the audit started, he intended to blame the payments on my company and call me a rogue vendor. "You helped him erase me because you believed you would replace me." "Yes. And now you want credit for discovering he would erase you too." "No." Her voice became quiet. "I want a deal. I am not asking you to forgive me." "Good." Her cooperation would matter. It could recover money, identify buyers, and prove intent. But cooperation was not absolution. I recommended that Valian pursue restitution while allowing prosecutors to evaluate her assistance independently. As the meeting ended, Natalie paused at the door. "For what it is worth," she said, "I knew you were the inventor the first week I joined. I know. I read the notebooks. That is why you worked so hard to make everyone believe I was not." She left without answering. Truth had finally entered every room Richard tried to close. Richard was released on bond 4 days after the launch. The federal investigation restricted his travel, required him to surrender his passport, and prohibited contact with Valiant employees and Blodies. None of those conditions prevented him from contacting the public. At 8:00 the next morning, a video appeared on every major platform. Richard sat in a plain room wearing a dark sweater instead of a suit. The lighting was soft. No company logos appeared behind him. Natalie would have approved of the calculated humility. My wife and her powerful father have used a painful private conflict to seize a company I built from nothing. He began. "I deeply regret losing my temper at the launch. Throwing wine was unacceptable. And I apologize. But one bad moment should not permit a billionaire dynasty to rewrite 10 years of history." He spoke for 17 minutes. He claimed I had contributed early conceptual sketches, but abandoned the project before any functional breakthrough. He said my father forced an oppressive license onto a young startup and then waited until the company became valuable to take control. He described himself as a husband who had protected my privacy while I struggled with prolonged grief and instability. Then he displayed a notebook. The cover was black. The pages yellowed at the edges. According to Richard, it contained his original LumenCore architecture, dated 6 months before my blue notebook. He held one page toward the camera. The diagram resembled my adaptive lattice. "My legal team will file a formal inventorship correction and challenge the Hayes patents," he said. "I welcome a fair scientific review without intimidation." The video ended with a sentence designed to become a headline: "Truth does not belong to the richest family in the room." By noon, public opinion had split. Some people still saw him as a thief and abuser. Others called him a flawed founder fighting a corporate dynasty. Commentators with no training in photonics compared blurred screenshots of the two notebooks. Anonymous accounts claimed my father had bought the loyalty of Valion's board. A former television host asked whether emotional wives should be allowed to destroy innovative companies through divorce disputes. Maya Chen called an emergency communications meeting. "We can release the archival record," she said. Every date. Repository hash. Witness statement. And patent filing. Not as a public argument between spouses. I replied, "We file through the proper process. Then publish a clear technical timeline." Conrad disagreed. Markets move faster than courts. We cannot let his narrative settle. My name has already spent years inside a narrative created for market speed. We do this correctly. Evelyn Shaw examined still images from Richard's notebook. The paper looks old. But the ink distribution is unusual. Some lines may have been added later. Can we prove it? With the physical book. He will not voluntarily surrender it. Richard's attorneys filed a petition with the Patent Office that afternoon. They alleged that Samuel Hayes and I had intentionally omitted Richard as the principal inventor and used the Institute's influence to monopolize technology he developed independently. They attached scans of the Black Notebook, testimony from 2 former contractors, and an unsigned early concept memo naming Richard as lead architect. One of the contractors was a man I remembered, Dr. Peter Lang, a computational physicist. The other was unknown to me. Peter's declaration stated that he saw Richard demonstrate the adaptive routing concept before I produced my first design. The statement was false. But false evidence does not become harmless simply because you know the truth. It has to be dismantled piece by piece. Evelyn requested expedited discovery. Daniel contacted the Institute's archive manager. Priya began reconstructing every digital trace from the year the invention began. I returned to the blue notebook and read it from the first page. My mother appeared throughout the margins. She had been a biochemist, not an electrical engineer. But she asked unusually effective questions. Beside one early lattice drawing, she wrote, "What happens when one path gets tired?" I had laughed and explained that light did not become tired. Her question led me to model local degradation and create adaptive rerouting. Another page contained a coffee stain shaped like a crescent. I remembered the morning it happened. Mom had brought coffee into the cleanroom antechamber despite posted rules. Then argued that the cup had never crossed the safety line. The memory gave me an idea. The notebook's dates were supported by Institute logs. But Richard would claim those could be manipulated by my father. Physical context might provide an independent timestamp. The coffee came from a cafe that printed rotating quotations and batch codes on its cups. My mother kept almost everything associated with major experiments, arsene for the station. In a storage box at the Half Moon Bay cottage, I found a photograph of the stained notebook beside the coffee cup. The image metadata showed the date and device signature. In the background, a newspaper front page reported an earthquake that had occurred that morning. Still, a photograph could be attacked as altered. Then I noticed a small square object beside the notebook, the first test wafer. I had believed it was lost. My mother mounted failed components in resin and used them as paperweights. The square in the photograph had a distinctive crack across one corner. I searched the cottage and found it on a shelf beneath a stack of gardening books. The wafer contained a primitive version of the adaptive lattice physically etched into silicon 11 years earlier. Its fabrication number linked to an independent university nanofabrication facility. Their records confirmed I submitted the design and received the wafer months before Richard's alleged notebook date. It was not a working processor, but it proved the architecture existed in material form, under my authorship. Evelyn smiled when she saw it. He brought a forged notebook to a fight against a manufactured wafer. The second breakthrough came from Priya. Richard's black notebook included a diagram with a small labeling error. 2 channels were marked P17. The same duplicated label appeared in a digital slide I created years later for a private presentation to Richard. I corrected the error before filing the patent. If his notebook truly predated mine, it could not contain a mistake introduced in my later slide. He copied the diagram backward. Priya said. Then aged the page. Ink analysis would confirm the sequence if we obtained the original. The court ordered Richard to surrender the notebook for independent examination. His attorneys claimed it had been stolen from their office the night before transfer. Security footage showed no break-in. The notebook had disappeared because it could not survive testing. Richard responded with another video accusing us of destroying evidence. Then the unknown contractor in his filing contacted Daniel. Her name was Rebecca Sloan. She had worked briefly for a document restoration company in Sacramento. Richard's private investigator hired her 3 months earlier to obtain period-appropriate paper, age it with controlled humidity, and bind it into a notebook using materials manufactured more than a decade ago. He told her the project was a prop for a historical exhibit. When she saw the media coverage, she recognized the cover. Rebecca provided invoices, message, and photographs taken during the fabrication process. One image showed blank aged pages before Richard added the diagrams. Another showed his hand testing ink on a discarded sheet. The inventorship challenge began collapsing before the first hearing. But Richard was not finished. He filed for divorce and requested emergency preservation of all marital assets. In the petition, he claimed, my family trust, patent royalties, and equity interest in Valian were marital property accumulated through his commercialization efforts. He also demanded temporary control of the hillside home and accused me of financially coercive conduct for supporting the board's suspension. My divorce attorney, Leah Morgan, read the petition and said, he is attempting to convert the marriage into a second battlefield because the first one is failing. Can he reach the patents? No. The foundational patents belong to the Institute, and your inventor rights predate the marriage. But he can create delay and expense. Richard also sought access to my medical records, claiming they were relevant to my capacity during licensing negotiations. The tactic mirrored his recorded plan. We opposed the request and submitted the audio recording in which he discussed using grief to remove me. The judge denied access and issued a protective order. During the first divorce conference, Richard appeared by video from his attorney's office. It was the first time I had seen him since his arrest. He looked older. Not remorseful, compressed. The public version of him had always expanded to fill every room. Now the screen contained him. The mediator asked whether reconciliation was possible. No, I said. Richard answered. My wife is under extraordinary pressure from her father. I believe she will eventually understand what has been done to us. There is no us left, I said. He looked directly into the camera. There will always be an us. You cannot tell the story of Lumencore without me. I do not intend to. Your role will be recorded accurately. The distinction frightened him more than erasure would have. Richard understood that history would include him not as sole genius, but as a collaborator who chose theft over partnership. Mediation failed. Meanwhile, Valian faced its own internal reckoning. The independent audit found that Northstar received $3 million in improper payments. Another $1 million had been routed through consulting contracts connected to Grant Mercer and Shell entities used for the attempted technology sale. Safety objections were removed from board materials. Employee complaints were redirected to executives implicated in the complaints. Several directors admitted they had ignored warning signs because revenue targets were being met. Maya refused to let the board blame everything on Richard and Natalie. A corrupt leader requires a system that rewards silence, she said at an all-hands meeting. We are examining the system. The company created a restitution pool funded by recovered Northstar assets. executive insurance, and canceled bonuses. Employees fired for protecting scientific records were offered reinstatement or compensation. Authorship credits were reviewed project by project. Safety teams received independent reporting lines. I chaired the Scientific Integrity Committee but did not control its membership. Half the seats belonged to elected engineers and research staff. One seat went to an external ethicist. Another went to a representative from a public interest technology group. During the first meeting, Luis Moreno raised his hand. Dr. Hayes, should the product still launch under the name LumenCore? The brand is associated with Richard's false story. The question divided the room. Some believed renaming would separate the technology from scandal. Others argued that changing names would look like another attempt to erase history. I asked the engineers who had built it. Priya said, "Keep the name, but change what it means. Publish the complete development record." Owen agreed. The product survived because many people refused to let one man own it. We kept LumenCore. The revised technical history listed 47 principal contributors across materials science, optical engineering, firmware, packaging, and safety. My name appeared first under foundational architecture, followed by my mother's institute project, the early laboratory team, and every later group. Richard's name appeared under commercialization strategy and systems integration, with a formal note that his inventorship claims remained under legal review. Accuracy, not revenge. That choice cost us some supporters who wanted a cleaner villain story. It also protected the record from becoming propaganda in the opposite direction. 6 weeks after the gala, the Patent Office held an emergency evidentiary conference. Richard's attorneys withdrew the black notebook after Rebecca Sloan's evidence surfaced, but they continued arguing that he contributed essential inventive concepts during commercialization. I testified for 4 hours. The hearing room contained no chandeliers, no wine, and no audience waiting for spectacle. Only technical questions mattered. I explained the adaptive routing architecture, the self-correction mechanism, the phase key, and the transition from laboratory wafer to commercial processor. Richard's counsel tried to suggest that my absence meant I could not understand later development. "Can you identify a design change made after you left full-time work?" he asked. Yes. The third-generation thermal map divided the lower quadrant into 12 control zones instead of 8. Who developed that change? Dr. Meena Shah's team proposed it. Owen Park validated it. Richard approved the budget. Did you invent it? No. He seemed surprised. Then the commercial product contains inventions beyond yours. Of course. That has never been disputed. Therefore, Richard Vail may be an inventor. Management, financing, approval, and ambition are not automatically invention. Identify the claim element he conceived. The attorney moved to another question. Technical truth is often less dramatic than public narrative. It is also harder to manipulate because every claim has components. You either contributed a specific novel element or you did not. Owen testified that Richard influenced product strategy but did not originate any patent claim. Meena testified that he pressured teams to describe engineering choices as his ideas after presentations. Priya demonstrated the altered repository history. The university facility authenticated the early wafer. The panel found no evidence that Richard had been improperly omitted from the foundational patents. It referred the forged notebook matter to enforcement authorities. When the decision became public, Richard's supporters called the process rigged. But investors stopped listening. Evidence had survived contact with scrutiny. 2 days later, Richard violated his bond conditions. He did not flee. He contacted an employee. The employee was Luis. Richard sent him an encrypted message offering $2 million in future equity if he would testify that I ordered the thermal data changed after validation. The message included a threat if Luis refused. Richard would release private immigration information about Luis's parents and claim they had received improper company benefits. Luis brought the message directly to Maya and federal investigators. Richard's bond was revoked. As officers led him from the hearing, he shouted toward reporters, "Amelia is destroying everyone who tells the truth. I watched the footage once, then turned it off." He still believed truth was whatever preserved him. The criminal case was now unavoidable. The federal indictment arrived 9 weeks after the gala. Richard faced charges related to attempted theft of controlled technology, obstruction of an investigation, destruction and fabrication of evidence, conspiracy to access a protected government system, wire fraud, and witness tampering. Grant Mercer was charged alongside him. Victor Morrow entered a plea and agreed to identify the foreign buyers behind the attempted transaction. Natalie negotiated a cooperation agreement that required full restitution and truthful testimony, but did not erase her exposure to fraud and obstruction charges. The wine itself produced only a misdemeanor assault allegation. Publicly, it remained the image everyone remembered. Legally, it was the smallest part of what Richard had done. That distinction mattered to me. Violence is often described as an isolated loss of control, but his action at the gala belonged to the same structure as the stolen designs, the altered records, and the forged notebook. He believed my voice was an obstacle. When quiet manipulation failed, he used public humiliation. When that failed, he used sabotage. The methods changed. The entitlement did not. Richard's defense team attempted to separate every event. The wine was marital stress. The hidden prototype chamber was routine security. The Morrow meeting was exploratory financing. The malicious code came from Grant. The forged notebook came from an overzealous investigator. The message to Luis was misunderstood negotiation. A pattern disappears if you force people to look at each piece alone. Prosecutors put the pieces back together. The trial began 7 months after the launch. By then, Valiant had stabilized under Maya's leadership. LumenCore entered limited production for research institutions and hospitals. The consortium contract expanded after independent testing confirmed the corrected safety design. Employees who once hid behind non-disclosure agreements testified openly about pressure to erase authorship and minimize risk. I entered the courthouse through a side door to avoid cameras. My father walked beside me, but we did not arrive with an entourage. He understood that this was not his stage. Natalie testified first among the senior executives. She wore a plain navy suit and no visible jewelry. The prosecutor asked how she became involved with Richard. At first, professionally, she said. He wanted a founder story that investors could remember. The actual history involved Amelia, Hayes Institute, several research teams, and years of incremental development. Richard said complexity weakened confidence. What did you do? I simplified the story until it became false. She described the fabricated napkin legend, the removal of my name, the editing of interviews, and the creation of North Star. She admitted that she used company funds for personal expenses and helped Richard conceal their affair. Why did you participate? The prosecutor asked. Ambition. Greed. And because Richard made cruelty feel like strategy. Richard's attorney attacked her credibility. You are testifying to reduce your own sentence. Yes. You lied for years. Yes. You destroyed records. Yes. So the jury should believe you now because you have discovered honesty at a convenient time. No. Natalie replied, they should believe the messages, bank records, recordings, and files that exist independently of me. The answer was stronger than denial. Grant Mercer testified through his attorney only after prosecutors introduced location data placing him at the lab, the airport, and the private club. He claimed Richard instructed him to treat the prototypes as personal founder property. I asked whether the board approved. Grant said, "He told me the board worked for him." Morrow explained the intended sale. The foreign buyer wanted LumenCore not merely for computing efficiency, but for its adaptive capability in surveillance and encrypted signal processing. Richard promised a clean version outside United States export controls. In exchange, Morrow's network would provide emergency financing after Valian failed the consortium deadline. The scheme depended on the company appearing to collapse without Richard. He planned the crisis so he could return as savior. Priya testified about the repository alterations. Owen explained the safety threshold. Richard lowered. Luis described the bribery attempt. Rebecca Sloan detailed the fabrication of the black notebook. Then I took the stand. The courtroom did not resemble the ballroom. But I felt the same attention settle over me. Richard sat at the defense table. He did not look ashamed. He looked offended that I had continued existing beyond his version of me. The prosecutor began with the science. I explained the original problem, the adaptive lattice, and the early wafer. We moved through my mother's illness, my leave from the laboratory, and the promises Richard made about recognition. "Why did you remain silent as your name disappeared?" I was grieving. "And I trusted my husband." Later. When I realized the erasure was deliberate, I needed evidence strong enough to protect the employees and the technology, not just my reputation. "Did you plan the confrontation at the gala?" I planned to ask for the recognition he promised and to present evidence if he denied it. I did not plan the assault. The prosecutor played the video on the courtroom screen. Natalie called me an uneducated housewife. I said the product came from my designs. Richard threw the wine. The sound of the crowd gasping filled the room again. I watched without looking away. "Why did you call your father?" "Because he represented the institute that owned the patents, and the license was being violated in front of investors. Also because my husband had just attacked me." What happened when Dr. Hayes entered? People stood because they recognized his authority. I remember wishing they had recognized the evidence before they recognized the man. That sentence silenced the courtroom. On cross-examination, Richard's attorney suggested I use the incident to seize control. "Did you become chief research officer after your husband was removed?" "Yes." "Did your equity increase in value after the company stabilized?" "Yes." "Did your public profile grow dramatically?" "Yes." "So you benefited from Richard's downfall." "I benefited from the correction of a fraud that harmed me." "That does not mean I created the fraud." "Is it true that your father threatened to terminate the license he wanted to?" "I asked him not to." "Because you wanted the company for yourself." "Because employees and public programs depended on technology that should not be destroyed to punish one executive." The attorney displayed the continuity amendment. "Your own father agreed that you could be replaced." "Yes." "Without telling me." "That decision was wrong." "And we disclosed it." He paused. He expected me to defend my father blindly. The truth made his trap useless. "Dr. Hayes, are you saying every man around you betrayed you?" "No. I am saying institutions fail when they treat a person's consent as an inconvenience." Richard exploited that failure. My father acknowledged his part and corrected it. Richard fabricated evidence and tried to sell protected technology. Richard finally looked away. The defense called him to testify despite the risk. He spoke with the confidence that had once convinced investors to fund an empty office. He described himself as the commercial architect without whom my designs would have remained academic sketches. Some of that was true. Richard had built teams, raised capital, and understood markets. The tragedy was not that he lacked talent. It was that talent never felt sufficient unless everyone else disappeared. "I loved Amelia," he said. "I protected her through years of depression. I carried the company while she withdrew." The launch confrontation was the culmination of years of emotional abuse from her family. His attorney asked about the wine. "I regret it every day." The prosecutor stood for cross-examination. "Mr. Val, after throwing wine at your wife. Did you apologize? I attempted to speak with her. Did you apologize? No. Did you then order a technician to alter authorship records? I ordered preservation of accurate records. The prosecutor displayed Richard's message: delete any copy marked AH. Does AH stand for Amelia Hayes? I do not recall. Did you take prototype 3 from company storage? It was founder property. Was it listed as Valiant property? Yes. Administratively. Did you meet Victor Morrow with a validation unit hidden from the board I was seeking financing? Did you tell him you possessed Dr. Hayes's biometric phase key? I believe the authorization belonged to the company. Did you obtain her biometric data through a medical clinic without her informed consent? Richard hesitated. The prosecutor introduced the clinic contract. A shell entity, controlled by Richard, paid for executive biometric collection and transferred encrypted records to Grant Mercer. Did your wife know? No. Did the consortium know you intended to place hidden collection code on the device? I did not understand the code. Yet you planned to deliver it. I relied on security professionals. Mr. Val, is there any harmful act in this case for which you accept personal responsibility? Richard looked toward the jury. I accept responsibility for trusting the wrong people. Natalie closed her eyes. Grant stared at the table. Even Richard's attorney seemed to shrink. The jury deliberated for 2 days. They found him guilty on most counts, including obstruction, attempted theft, and unlawful transfer of protected technology, conspiracy, wire fraud, évidence fabrication, and witness tampering. They acquitted him on one narrow charge related to Grant's independent access to a server, finding insufficient proof that Richard ordered that specific act. The mixed verdict mattered. It showed the jury had evaluated evidence rather than simply punishing a disliked man. At sentencing, employees submitted impact statements. Some described lost careers. Others described the fear of watching scientific safety become a branding obstacle. Luis spoke about the threat against his parents. I did not request the maximum sentence. I requested accountability without mythology. Richard Vale is not a misunderstood genius destroyed by a powerful family. I told the court. He is also not the sole creator of everything harmful around him. Many people enabled him, and some have accepted responsibility. He should be sentenced for what the evidence proves, not turned into a legend in either direction. The judge imposed a substantial federal sentence, financière restitution, and restrictions on future executive and technology transfer roles. Grant received a shorter sentence after cooperation. Morrow's case continued under sealed national security proceedings. Natalie received prison time, followed by supervised release, and was ordered to surrender North Star assets. The divorce concluded 3 months later. Richard attempted to claim part of my trust, but failed. The court recognized the patents and premarital research interests as separate. Our shared home was sold. A portion of his remaining Valiant equity was transferred into restitution and legal recovery funds. I kept my mother's cottage, my original notebooks, and the only property I truly cared about: the right to determine what happened to my work. At the final hearing, Richard asked to speak to me privately. Leah advised against it. I agreed only through a secure conference room with attorneys present. He sat across a long table wearing a detention uniform. Without the suit, the lights, and the audience, he looked like an ordinary man who had made extraordinary damage. You won? He said. This was not a competition. It always was for your father. My father is not here. Richard studied me. Do you remember the symposium where we met? Yes? I was the only person who saw what your design could become. You saw value. My mother saw me. His face tightened. I did love you, he said. Perhaps. But you loved being the person beside my potential more than you loved the person who possessed it. If you had returned sooner, none of this would have happened. The old mechanism appeared even at the end. No. I said. Your choices would still belong to you. He leaned forward. Valian will forget me. Maya will turn it into a committee. You will bury the fire beneath ethics policies. The fire was never yours alone. You still use my product name. We use the name thousands of employees built. He looked toward the observation window. When people remember Lumencore, they will remember me. Yes, I said, accurately. That was the last time we spoke. 1 year after the gala, Valian returned to the same hotel for a public scientific forum. Not a product spectacle. No giant portrait of a founder. No manufactured story about a lone genius. The ballroom contained demonstration tables staffed by engineers, safety reviewers, students, and public interest researchers. The invitation listed every principal contributor. At the entrance stood a transparent display case containing 3 objects: my blue notebook, the first cracked wafer, and the corrected validation core. Beside them was a plaque explaining the development history, including the period of deliberate misattribution and the reforms that followed. My father arrived without announcement. A few executives stood out of habit. He motioned for them to sit. This is Amelia's room, he said quietly. No, I replied. It belongs to the work. The forum opened with a scholarship named for my mother, the Claire Hayes Fellowship, for researchers returning to science after caregiving, illness, grief, or other interruptions. Applicants would not be treated as if absence erased expertise. Their work would remain theirs. Their consent would be explicit. Their paths back would be supported rather than judged. I used part of my settlement and royalties to build a new laboratory beside Hayes Institute. The laboratory was not named after me. We called it the Continuum Lab because scientific lives are rarely straight lines. People pause. They care for parents, raise children, survive illness, change fields, and return. Knowledge does not become ownerless while a person heals. Priya became Director of Research Integrity. Owen led Systems Development. Louise completed a graduate degree through a company fellowship and later ran thermal safety. Meena Shah returned as an external scientific advisor. Maya remained chief executive and refused every magazine request that tried to crown her the new sole savior. Valian's valuation eventually recovered. But differently. Investors asked more questions. Releases moved more slowly. Safety interruptions were reported instead of hidden. The company lost some people who missed the old speed. It gained others who understood that trust is also an asset. On the anniversary evening, I stood near the same place where Richard had thrown the wine. The carpet had been replaced. Nothing physical remained of the stain. A young engineering student approached holding a notebook. Dr. Hayes, she said. I left my program for 2 years to care for my brother. I thought I had ruined my career. Your fellowship made me apply again. What are you working on? Her face brightened as she described an optical sensor for early neurological diagnosis. I listened, asked questions, and wrote the name of a materials researcher she should contact. When she walked away, my father joined me. Your mother would have liked her, he said. She would have asked the most inconvenient question in the room. She usually did. The lights dimmed for the final presentation. This time, the screen did not display a founder. It displayed a network of names connected by lines showing how each contribution led to another. Mine was there. So was Richard's. So were 47 others. I did not feel diminished by sharing the screen. Accurate recognition is not a limited resource. The lie had always been that only one person could matter. After the presentation, the hotel staff served dinner in the adjoining gallery. I carried a glass of sparkling water instead of wine. People approached to congratulate me. But the conversations felt different from the launch a year earlier. Engineers introduced other engineers. Investors asked about testing protocols before market size. Reporters requested access to the authorship archive instead of asking for a dramatic marriage. Quote, "The culture had not become perfect. No institution changes because of a single scandal or policy. Ambition still existed. Egos still entered meetings. Deadlines still tempted people to simplify inconvenient facts. The difference was that silence no longer had the same protection." Near the end of the evening, Conrad Bell handed me a small envelope. "We found this during the final inventory of Richard's executive office," he said. Inside was a folded copy of the speech Richard originally planned to deliver at the launch. I opened it slowly. The first pages contained the language he used that night: the impossible dream, the relentless founder, the future of computing. Near the end, a paragraph had been crossed out in thick black ink. My wife, Dr. Amelia Hayes, created the scientific foundation that made LumenCore possible. Years ago, when others saw a fragile laboratory experiment, she saw a system capable of changing the world. This achievement belongs first to her. Beside the paragraph, Natalie had written, "Remove. Weakens founder narrative. Creates ownership questions." Underneath, in Richard's handwriting, was one word: agreed. I had wondered whether he ever truly intended to keep his promise. The answer was more complicated than a simple no. At some point, he had prepared the truth. Then he decided the truth cost too much. I folded the speech and returned it to the envelope. "Do you want it placed in the archive?" Conrad asked. "Yes," I said. With the editing marks visible, the document demonstrated something important. Erasure rarely happens in one dramatic act. It happens through small decisions that appear efficient. Remove a paragraph. Simplify a timeline. Postpone recognition. Call collaboration confusing. Call consent an obstacle. By the time someone throws wine, the violence has already been rehearsed in quieter forms. Before leaving the hotel, I walked alone into the empty ballroom. Staff were clearing glasses and folding table linens. The stage screen had gone dark. At the far end of the room stood the doors through which my father entered 1 year earlier. That scene had become the most popular part of the story online. People loved the moment every executive stood. They called it the ultimate reversal, the humiliated wife revealed as the daughter of a powerful man. But power inherited from my father was never the deepest reversal. The true reversal happened in the Oakland laboratory when I placed my hands on the calibration controls and remembered that I could still do the work. It happened when I disclosed my father's mistake, instead of hiding it to protect our family image. It happened when employees who had been frightened into silence saw their names restored. It happened when I refused to become the next lone genius myth. My father's entrance stopped the launch. My return stopped the erasure. Outside, the city air was cold and clear. I drove to Half Moon Bay instead of the hillside house that no longer belonged to either Richard or me. The cottage windows reflected the moon. Inside, my mother's letter rested in a frame above the desk where I reviewed fellowship applications. The next morning, I opened a package from the patent office. It contained certified corrections and supplemental inventor records for several derivative filings. My name appeared where it should have appeared from the beginning. Other contributors' names had also been added. I ran my finger across the printed letters. Recognition could not restore the years I spent believing silence was love. It could not erase the video, the affair, or the knowledge that my husband planned to use my grief as evidence against me. But recognition restored continuity between the young engineer I had been and the woman I had become. I had not disappeared. I had paused. There is a difference. Several months later, I visited Richard's former office before Valian converted it into shared project rooms. The walls were bare, except for faint rectangles where magazine covers once hung. His massive desk had been removed. In a bottom cabinet, workers found the fake restaurant napkin Natalie created for the founder story. On it was a crude sketch of the lumen core lattice and the sentence, "They said it could not be done." The ink was less than 4 years old. I almost threw it away. Instead, I sent it to the archive beside the real blue notebook and labeled it accurately. Marketing prop used to construct false soul inventor narrative. History does not become honest by preserving only noble objects. Sometimes the counterfeit belongs in the display because it teaches people how easily a story can replace evidence. The Continuum Lab opened its second research wing 18 months after the trial. We invited scientists from different disciplines who had interrupted their careers for caregiving. One was a robotics engineer who spent 5 years raising a child with complex medical needs. Another was a chemist who left academia during her own cancer treatment. A third was a physicist who worked night shifts after immigrating and could not return to research until his 40s. None of them needed a heroic comeback narrative. They needed equipment, time, credit, and respect. At the opening ceremony, my father stood in the back row. He had gradually stepped away from daily institute operations, not because anyone forced him out, but because he recognized that institutions should survive their founders. He remained a scientist, advisor, and difficult questioner. He no longer signed decisions on my behalf. Afterward, he gave me a small wooden box that had belonged to my mother. Inside was the fountain pen she used to sign the original incorporation papers for Hayes Research Institute. She wanted you to have it when you founded something for reasons that were entirely your own. He said, "I did not found the Continuum Lab alone. That may be the reason it is yours." I used the pen to sign the lab's permanent charter. The first article protected inventor attribution. The second protected the right of researchers to step away without surrendering ownership. The third prohibited executive agreements that changed scientific authority without the informed consent of the person affected. The fourth required transparent disclosure of conflicts, including family influence. My father signed as a witness, not an owner. Valian later released the second generation of Lumen Core. The launch took place online from the Oakland facility. There were no chandeliers and no celebrity host. Luis presented the thermal safety improvements. Priya explained the record integrity system. Mina discussed materials. Owen described systems integration. I presented the adaptive architecture and credited the teams that extended it. At the end, Maya displayed a slide titled, "What We Learned." The first line read, "A product can survive a failed leader only if the truth is larger than the leader." The second read, "Scientific credit is not decoration. It is part of safety, accountability, and trust." The third read, "No launch is worth silencing the people who made it possible. Orders exceeded forecasts." But that was not the number I remembered. I remembered the employee survey conducted after the release. For the first time, most research staff said they believed they could report a safety or authorship concern without losing their careers. That was the real valuation recovery. People often ask whether I regret not speaking sooner. The honest answer is yes and no. I regret every moment Richard used my silence to hurt others. I regret dismissing early warnings because confronting them threatened the life I thought I had. But I refuse to blame the grieving woman I was for not responding with perfect strength. She was surviving the death of her mother while someone she trusted manipulated her reality. Compassion for your former self is not an excuse. It is how you stop an abuser from continuing to define you after he is gone. I also get asked whether my father saved me. He came when I called. He brought legal authority, evidence, and protection. I will always be grateful for that. But a powerful father cannot restore a person who still believes she has no voice. I had to decide to use mine. I had to return to the lab, face the patent hearing, correct the company without owning it, and build something that did not depend on another person's name. The room stood for Samuel Hayes because they knew his reputation. Eventually, they listened to Amelia Hayes because the evidence was mine. On the second anniversary of the gala, I wore the same cream-colored dress. The hotel's restoration specialist had removed almost every trace of red wine. A faint shadow remained near the seam. If the fabric caught strong light, I considered replacing it. Instead, I wore it to present the first Claire Hayes Fellowship Awards. The shadow did not embarrass me. It was proof that damage and dignity can occupy the same material without becoming the same thing. After the ceremony, a reporter asked for one final statement about Richard. I looked toward the display case holding the first notebook. He threw wine in my face to erase my voice. I said, but he could not erase my name from the first design. Then I walked away from the cameras and returned to the people building what came next. Richard believed invention meant being the loudest person on the stage. Natalie believed history could be rewritten by controlling the image. The executives believed authority belonged to whichever powerful man entered the room. All of them misunderstood the same thing. Truth does not become yours because people applaud you. Truth belongs to the record, to the evidence, and to the people who were brave enough to preserve it. He threw wine in my face to erase my voice, but he could not erase my name from the first design. This story carries meaningful educational value about intellectual honesty, personal dignity, and ethical leadership. Through Amelia's journey, viewers learn that an invention does not belong to the person who speaks the loudest, receives the most publicity, or holds the highest position. True authorship must be supported by original research, verifiable records, and the contributions of everyone involved. The story also shows how dangerous it can be when ambition becomes more important than truth. Richard did not only erase Amelia's name, he ignored safety concerns, manipulated scientific records, misused company funds, and placed employees, investors, and the public at risk. His actions remind us that technological progress has little value when it is built through deception, exploitation, or the silencing of others. Most importantly, Amelia does not use her authority merely to take revenge or replace one powerful figure with another. She protects the employees, restores the scientific record, strengthens safety procedures, and creates systems that give researchers the right to defend their work. The story therefore teaches that real leadership is not about controlling every decision. It is about telling the truth, sharing recognition fairly, accepting independent oversight, and protecting people from the misuse of power. Scriptwriter Nguyen Van Chien.